you like to present your closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor. He knew the will, so he found a way. Members of the jury, let's break that down for you, starting with the will. This is the will of Avery Bancroft. It's legally notarized and it's legally upheld. Now, what Kirby Doolittle came up here and told you today was that 95% of Mr. Bancroft's estate goes to Taylor Hobson. This is how Avery Bancroft felt about his will before the Mid-Riverina Express. But this is how he felt after. Now, something must have happened between these two instances. In fact, Avery Bancroft said himself, if Taylor Hobson crosses me one more time, that kid is going to lose his spot in the will. And what does this will say? The one that was found on the Mid-Riverina Express. I give the entirety of my estate, all 100% of it, to the Black Bear Casino Fire Victims Fund, a Midlands nonprofit. What else does it say? If any person tries to contest this will or tries to set it aside, that person will have no right to anything. This explicitly includes Taylor Hobson. So let's think about why. Something must have happened between the writing of those two documents for Avery Bancroft to make such a drastic change. And that something was a broken relationship that would culminate on a train ride through the Australian outback. Now, in order to understand this case, members of the jury, it's important to take a step back. You have to understand from the beginning Taylor Hobson's relationship with his father. Well, like Taylor Hobson came to the stand and told you today, he had a very difficult upbringing. He was the son of a single mother, and his father was nobody to him as a child. That was, of course, until his mother was diagnosed with cancer. And in a last-ditch effort, in a Hail Mary attempt, he would reach out to the person that was radio silent his entire life. And what came back? More radio silence. Taylor Hobson never forgot that, and he always kept that close to his heart. But miraculously, Avery Bancroft would come back and reach out to him, and Taylor Hobson's life would change forever. Now, when I say that Taylor Hobson's life changed, I don't exactly mean in the most fortuitous of ways. Well, let's just say that Mr. Hobson relished in the luxuries of his life. He bought sports cars, he invested in fine wines, and he had his own personal chef. Now, he didn't save a single dime of this money. Keep in mind, this is the person that was fighting for table scraps before. But now that he had this money, he spared no expense. Well, that was, of course, until the money stopped flowing. And Avery Bancroft would cut him off in April of 2023. Now, in a flash, Taylor Hobson's lifestyle, that life-altering moment that he had, disappeared from his eyes. And he had no idea what to do. But he remembered one thing: the will of Avery Bancroft. Now, like I said before, he knew that even though those stipends were cut off, he still had the opportunity to get that will. And you'll hear today that after those $50,000 stipends, that was when he decided that boarding the Mid-Riverina Express and having a conversation with his father was the only way to get back that lifestyle. Now, when he boarded the Mid-Riverina Express, things didn't exactly go great for him. After numerous conversations with his father, tensions only escalated. In fact, they escalated to a point where Avery Bancroft decided to cut his own son out of the will. That's where we see this thing. Now, that's what happened, but now that elusive goal of getting back that lifestyle was even further away. But she remembered one thing. She knew the will, but now all she had to do was find a way. And members of the jury, the way was crystal clear for Taylor Hobson. Let's take a look at the medical report of Avery Bancroft. Now, it says that he was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, a condition that Hillary Edmond told you results in potassium being fatal to an individual. It's effectively poison. And who was the person who was conveniently there for that diagnosis? Well, it was Taylor Hobson. So Taylor Hobson was the first person to know that potassium was poison for Avery Bancroft. Now, he kept this in mind as he kept on going. Now that he knew the will, and he knew that 95%, even though Avery Bancroft was going to change that will, he didn't change it yet. He had a small window to stop that from happening, a window that was on board the Mid-Riverina Express. He had to stop Avery Bancroft from getting off that train, and he had to secure his legacy. And that's exactly what he did. Well, I told you today that he capitalized on the vulnerability of his father, but I'm going to show you why. And Jordan Nathanson came up today and left a pretty great trail of evidence, so I'm going to follow that along with you guys. It all starts with a receipt from Shares Tool and Craft. Now, this receipt shows you that between the hours of 6:30 and 7:30, banana extract was purchased. Now, like I said before, banana extract is poison to Avery Bancroft. But what else was on this receipt? Now, something else that was on this receipt was sunglasses. And who would be the person who was on the Mid-Riverina Express with a pair of sunglasses? Well, that was Taylor Hobson. And Jordan Nathanson told you that he overheard her saying, "Where's the other part? If we don't have it, we're doomed." And where would that other part be found? Well, the other lens of his glasses would be found right next to the cold, lifeless body of Avery Bancroft. Now, today, the plaintiff brings forward the Slayer statute proceedings, which essentially states that because Taylor Hobson played a part in the death of his father, he doesn't hold to gain any of his estate. Now, today, the defense attempted to bring forward the fact that Dr. Hillary Edmond was in fact the one who contributed to the death. But that doesn't exactly check out, does it? After all, Alex Silva came to the stand and told you that Dr. Hillary Edmond, in his professional expertise, did everything that was necessary to save his life. He went through all measures and everything. In fact, he did CPR, the universal sign of saving an individual's life when it's in crisis. Well, Taylor Hobson came up and said that he asked about using calcium, but nobody else heard that statement being made. Nobody else heard that conversation in the room. And let's keep in mind, that's the person that's being accused of killing his father. That's the person that stands here on the defense. Now, who else did they call up? They called up Dana Haskins, a psychologist who couldn't even tell me the name of the test they conducted. I mean, she's in all of her years of expertise and all the years in administering her tests, she couldn't tell me the name of that test they administered. Now, finally, we do have the burden of proof today, showing by the preponderance of evidence that it was more likely than not. But the trail of evidence leads directly to Taylor Hobson. As I followed and I showed you those sunglasses, and Dr. Hillary Edmond would even tell you that Mr. Hobson would be holding a very reminiscent bottle, similar to that of this one. But Dr. Hillary Edmond wasn't holding a bottle like this. She never bought anything. She came up to the stand and told you she never even held this bottle. But who was? Taylor Hobson. Today, the evidence points to the fact that our three witnesses can show, and they're qualified in showing, that Taylor Hobson was responsible for this death. And as the plaintiff, we ask that you find Taylor Hobson liable for the death of his father, Avery Bancroft. Thank you.
may proceed. Yes. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Mr. Key, he just came before you all, and he said something that I found awful interesting. He told you, members of the jury, that Taylor's Hobson, his life changed forever. That there was a life-altering moment. And members of the jury, I find that real interesting. Because what the plaintiff wants to call a life-altering moment is losing an allowance. Not having someone important to you die. Not having your spouse chased down by political action. Not having your own practice chased down by political action committees backed by Avery Bancroft. Not your spouse becoming depressed, retreating from a public life. Not being forced to close your practice, being too dangerous to hire for 18 months. No. It was losing an allowance that was life-changing. But since Mr. Key wants to talk about what is life-changing, we should talk about Hillary Edmond. Because today, they called her up. She came and she sat right over here, and she looked at you. She told you a lot of different things. And one of the most interesting things she said was she was asked about this bottle of potassium. Now, members of the jury, make no mistake, her story, her testimony, was all carefully rehearsed. But in that moment, she looked at you and she slipped. And we had the opportunity to all see that. Because when asked about this bottle of potassium, and I wrote it down, she said it was sufficient to kill. Isn't that interesting, members of the jury? That doesn't sound like a compassionate doctor who's doing an analysis of Avery Bancroft. It doesn't sound like a professional who's telling us about the dangers of chronic kidney disease. You know, it almost sounds like an inner monologue. You have to wonder if in that moment when she was standing in that store looking up at that bottle of potassium, if that's what she was wondering to herself. She's looking at this thinking, is this sufficient to kill? And because today, the plaintiff, they had the burden to prove that it was Mr. Hobson and not Hillary Edmond. Now, let's walk through how this works. Because members of the jury, if I step back here, this is where the plaintiff starts their case. They start at 0. And every bit of evidence they show you, they get to take a step forward until they reach 51%. Every piece of evidence we show you as the defense that it wasn't Taylor Hobson, the plaintiff, they have to take a step back. And another step back. And members of the jury, standing here, I'm not 51% of the way through the courtroom at all. That's what it means to prove through a preponderance, that it's more likely than not. With each piece of evidence we show, they have to take a step back. So let's talk about the evidence they tried to show. Because they called Jordan Nathanson. And now, something important to mention about Jordan Nathanson. Jordan Nathanson, she's not a cop. She's not a detective. She's not an investigator. She's a private investigator that Shannon Shahid hired to talk about this case. And members of the jury, if Shannon Shahid wins, Jordan Nathanson gets $400,000. Gets to walk out that door, walk out of the courtroom today, $400,000 richer. So, members of the jury, of course, the testimony that Jordan Nathanson would give, well, it doesn't exactly make sense. Because today we heard about some sunglasses. And we heard that Mr. Hobson was apparently yelling about sunglasses and how we're going to get in trouble to someone else in the room. Members of the jury, where is that other person? They didn't come to court today. The plaintiff didn't call them as a witness. They never sat here to talk to you today. No, we only got Jordan Nathanson saying that that's what Mr. Hobson said. And another thing that Nathanson mentioned today, it was Mr. Hobson sitting in his room, holding up a bottle of potassium, waving it around, saying, I bought it, I'll do it tonight. Members of the jury, to who? So either the plaintiff wants you to believe that there's somebody else in that room who they didn't call to testify, or the plaintiff wants you to believe that Mr. Hobson, in planning to kill his father, sat in his room, left the door ajar for anyone to look in, waved around the murder weapon and said, look at me, I'm gonna kill my dad. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? But to be clear, it does, to be fair to the plaintiff, it does make sense when you realize what's at stake for Jordan Nathanson. And of course, we heard from Kirby Doolittle. Now, what Kirby told us is that as Dr. Edmond was rushing in to Mr. Bancroft on the ground, she didn't seem particularly concerned. She wasn't worried, she wasn't panicked. She walks in, she sees a man collapsed on the ground, and she looks at him and she says, well, that was fast. What was fast, members of the jury? The poison? The poison that she snuck in and fed to him? Him dying? Him having a heart attack? Because, starting at the beginning, Hillary Edmond knew everything she needed to about Avery Bancroft. He ruined her life. He did. Of course, she couldn't keep her story straight on that. But he ran attack ads against her spouse. Permanently ruined her reputation. She lost her practice. Her spouse lost her job. Her spouse lost any hope of ever doing anything political again. She can't show her face, members of the jury. And she knew in February, that she told us today, Avery Bancroft was going to be on that train. And so in pursuit of a job after not having any income for 18 months, she spends $7,500. She buys a train ticket. Instead of flying from one side of the continent to the other, instead of just flying to the job interview, she takes a train. Same one as Avery Bancroft. She drops a pretty fortune on it. After not working for 18 months. It doesn't make sense. But then you realize that she's in the same exact store that they want to say Taylor Hobson bought this bottle of potassium. She had the opportunity to buy it too. She knew that it would be fatal. She knew it would be sufficient to kill. And the day before Avery Bancroft dies, he comes to her. He says, I'm sorry. And for half a moment she believes it. And they said sometimes that's just the way things are. The way things are, members of the jury, sometimes lives get ruined. And she does what she has to take revenge. And members of the jury, on the note of lives being ruined, that's what the plaintiff is trying to do today. They're trying to make Mr. Hobson into a murderer. They're trying to say that a man who was just trying to reconnect with his father after losing the only family he had is a killer. Members of the jury, we called our own expert, one who's not a doctor of death. And our expert told you that Taylor Hobson, he didn't have any of the symptoms of being a killer. Nothing indicated him being an intentional killer. Find him not liable.
members of the jury, let's consider who has more at stake here. Now, I find it very interesting that opposing counsel brought up Jordan Nathanson. That's true, he has $400,000 to stand to gain here, but somebody has $400 million, and they're here to protect that legacy. But who are they contending is the one responsible? Somebody who years ago was the victim of a campaign. Yes, it was brutal, but please find Mr. Hobson alive.